The BBC's long-running, hard-hitting interview programme is no more. Welcome to Newswatch with me, Samira Ahmed. Coming up, why has the BBC axed Hard Talk? We talked to its main presenter for the past 19 years, Stephen Sackur. First, cameras and reporters were assembled in Downing Street on Wednesday morning in advance of Rachel Reeves's speech on the economy, and the 11 o'clock weather bulletin was cut abruptly short to return to them.
Capital cities. You're watching BBC News live with me, Christian Fraser, ahead of the Chancellor's spring statement, which she will be delivering in just over 2 hours' time.
It was a good half hour before Rachel Reeves actually emerged from that door, providing some amusement for Tim Hill, who compared the broadcast to a 1990s sitcom that satirised live news programmes. Ha ha, they just cut the weather forecast short on BBC News to go live to the closed front door of number 11. It's more like Drop the Dead Donkey than a serious news organisation. The following evening, there was some breaking news on the news channel that the King had spent some time in hospital that day after experiencing temporary side effects from his treatment for cancer.
He was diagnosed with cancer early last year. Buckingham Palace informed the public in February last year. I'll go through the timeline of that in just a moment, but just to reassure our viewers, the King was seen in public yesterday, wasn't he? He was at Somerset House in London for an event there, looking fit and well and smiling.
Felicity Rees took exception to the extent of the coverage that followed and its replacement of the scheduled programme. We turned to the news channel at 9 p.m. to watch Question Time live, delighted that we could watch it on television at this earlier hour. The breaking news about King Charles was communicated clearly. I was sorry to hear it, but over the following hour there was endless discussion of his original diagnosis, how his diary was managed and how he looked yesterday. It was repeatedly said that the presenters wanted to reassure the public, but the effect of repeating and drawing out the coverage was exactly the opposite. At the end of last week, there were also complaints of excessive coverage, this time of the closure for most of last Friday of Heathrow Airport, following a fire in a substation. Somebody emailing as Welsh Poultry attributed this to a metropolitan bias. Why on earth am I seeing a nearly 10-minute headline piece about a temporary airport closure? Must be in London. Now, since 1997, Hard Talk has been shown on a variety of BBC outlets, including the news channel domestically and internationally, World Service Radio and as a podcast. Its presenters have included Tim Sebastian, Zainab Badawi and Sarah Montague. For the past week or so, it's been running compilations of some of its best interviews, introduced by Stephen Sackur, the main presenter for the past 19 years.
For almost 3 decades, these studios have been the place where we at Hard Talk have sought to hold those with power and influence in our world to account. It's journalism that has mattered to us, and we hope it's mattered to you too. But at the end of this month, Hard Talk is coming to an end.
That decision, announced last October, has gone down badly with some members of the audience. Here's Brett Walker.
There is nothing like Hard Talk on the BBC schedule anymore, where one interviewer is talking to one subject in a wide-ranging discussion that lasts 20 to 25 minutes. And I really do worry, particularly given the cuts that have also been made to the BBC World Service's foreign language radio services, that this could have a very detrimental effect on the BBC's reputation worldwide.
We discussed the decision to end Hard Talk on this programme last autumn with the Chief Executive of BBC News, Deborah Turness, and you can still see that interview on our website. This week we were given this statement. Hard Talk has done great work for more than 25 years, but we've had to make some tough decisions given the level of savings required and changing audience habits. People are coming to our news channel for live and breaking news, while across the whole of BBC News we have hard-hitting long-form interviews and discussions on more platforms than ever, including Newsnight, Today, Sunday with Laura Kuensberg, World at 1 p.m, as well as across the World Service and the News Channel. We can no longer afford to run so many bespoke programme teams and are doing more to use and promote the high-impact interviews and important conversations that are happening every day across our platforms. BBC News will continue to hold power to account through rigorous interviews and reporting. Well, let's speak to Stephen Sackur, the outgoing presenter of Hard Talk. Hello, Stephen. You're leaving the BBC soon after almost 40 years, starting as a foreign correspondent in the US, Brussels, the Middle East, Eastern Europe, and you covered the Gulf War. Could I ask you to pick out any highlights?
Oh my goodness, Samira, it's hard because it's a long time, isn't it? And many stories under that bridge.
Thousands of Kuwaitis say the march to democracy has...
If I quickly pick out a few that'll always stay with me.
His presidency has been under a cloud for a year.
I was in the United States through the Lewinsky-Clinton scandal, which led to the impeachment of Bill Clinton. That was an extraordinary time in America. I was still in America for the hanging Chad election, and then 9/11 and everything that came after. So that period of my life, living in Washington at that particular time, was truly extraordinary.
For the moment, Mr. Shamir refuses to listen, but for him...
I lived in Jerusalem through the entire Oslo peace process. It came as the most extraordinary surprise to the world when the Palestinians and the Israelis appeared to be on the road to peace. I lived in Jerusalem for 3 years as, sadly, that peace plan began to unravel. So I'll never forget what I saw in that particular region.
Clearly, you've seen good times and bad times over the years. Can I ask what shape you think BBC News coverage is in now?
Everywhere I go, I know that people still value the BBC and still recognise those values of impartiality, independence, that the BBC has embodied for all of my working life. I think there are issues right now with the BBC. They're trying to transition to a digital world. They're trying to win engagement with young people, and they're struggling with that. I think they're also, and this is relevant to what has happened to Hard Talk, which of course is now being closed down by BBC bosses, I think they are struggling to define exactly what audiences want. I think audiences still have an enormous appetite for serious analytical news and current affairs. I wonder if the bosses at the BBC are quite as confident of that as I am.
Stephen, you are known as a combative interviewer and you've had a fair few lively exchanges with guests over the years. There are some viewers who think you can be too aggressive. Do they have a point?
I don't come out of the studio after every interview thinking, my God, that was a triumph. I got it just right. The tone was right. The number of times I interrupted a guest to try to bring them back on point was right. I definitely get things wrong. And I'm actually deeply self-critical. So oftentimes I come out of interviews thinking that could have been so much better. But I would say in defense of the format, not necessarily in defense of every one of my interviews, that you know, politicians, if we're talking about politicians, these days they are highly trained in obfuscation, in diversion, in a whole set of tactics designed to prevent them to having to face up to that accountability. My job is to research rigorously and forensically, to have the comeback, to have the detail, to ensure that I can give them a proper test. And I hope that if you judge me over 19 years, I got it right, perhaps more than I got it wrong.
The BBC has said that they're closing the programme because the audiences want live and breaking news on the news channel. That's where they want to focus, and that high-profile interviews will continue, but elsewhere. Do you accept that?
I accept that they'll still be doing interviews, and I can absolutely tell you that I'm proud of many of my colleagues at the BBC who do fantastic interviews in different parts of the world. What I think is important to stress, though, is that Hard Talk was a day-in, day-out specialist programme with highly trained researchers and producers, and one would hope a presenter with deep experience and knowledge, which was able, day after day, to do the in-depth interviews, and not just on the story of the day, because the implication, I think, of what the BBC is saying is that they want their interviews to be woven into their news coverage and therefore be devoted pretty much to the breaking news stories of the day. if you just think about in the last couple of months or 3 or 4 months, I've done really headline-making interviews with, for example, the outgoing president of the International Court of Justice about the genocide case being brought against Israel. I've interviewed President Vučić of Serbia. I've just done an interview with the president of the European Central Bank, Christine Lagarde. Now, all of those were headline-making interviews, but they weren't following the news of the day. And I worry that when Hard Talk goes, that in-depth analytical interview done with hugely important people, but not necessarily on the headline of the day, that'll be lost.
Because Hard Talk went out across World Service Radio and television, it's a particularly recognised brand internationally. Do you think current BBC News bosses recognised its value?
No, I think they are less interested than previous managers have been in autonomous programmes with personality and character of their own. And I'm not just thinking of Hard Talk, I'm thinking of shows like Newsnight and Panorama, which have seen their resources drastically cut in recent years because there is a deep desire to centralise the news machine. So I think that's where management today focuses its priorities, and I think it's really robbing the BBC of some extremely important journalism.
Stephen Sackur, thank you so much.
Samira, it's been a pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you for all your comments this week. If you want to share your opinions about what you see or hear on BBC News, on TV, radio, online and social media, email newswatch@bbc.co.uk, or you can find us on X @NewswatchBBC. You can call us or WhatsApp us on 0370 010 6676, and do have a look at previous interviews on our website, bbc.co.uk/newswatch. That's all from us for now. Thank you for joining us. Do think about getting in touch and perhaps even coming on the programme. We will be back to hear more of your thoughts about how the BBC covers the news next week. Goodbye.